Hey, today on Big Al Books, I'm going to be talking about the stuff that I was reading this July. So, depending on how you want to count it, I either read 9 books or 11. And the reason for that discrepancy is that one of the books was 3 novels by César Aira. So, this is either one physical book, but it also contains 3 short novels. So that's kind of César Aira's style. He's a very prolific Argentinian author. I think he's had over 80 books come out in Spanish so far, but not that many of them have been translated into English yet. But I know New Directions is on it. They're usually at least releasing one new translation a year, which is amazing because I really enjoy this guy. I've only ever read his short stories before, but now, after reading these 3 novels, I just want to read everything that I can by Aira. He is truly incredible. These 3 novels in this one are some of his most popular works. So in this collection, it included Ghosts, An Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter, and The Literary Conference. Aira has a distinct style of writing, and I loved the journey that you go on in each of these novels. He is clearly inspired by sci-fi and cinema, and he's not afraid to have these really fun, wacky, unpredictable plots, but he also is really interested in philosophy, so he's not afraid to stop the action of the plot to throw out some paragraphs, these philosophical musings about dreams, or architecture, or things like that. So his works are really fun while being really smart at the same time, and I do enjoy that. And while he always writes in his style, he covered a lot of different thematic grounds, so these 3 books were all very different from each other. So we had Ghosts is the first one, and that one is set in this unfinished apartment building, so while this building's still in construction. So it's in this eerie, in-between space, we're on an apartment that doesn't have walls or windows or anything. And it's kind of about the class divide of the rich prospective buyers who are coming to check out their future condos, and the poorer builders and caretakers, the people who are putting this place together. And then there are also these strange naked men on the construction site who we find out are ghosts. So there's that whole supernatural thing going on as well. The next book is An Episode in the Life of a Landscape Painter. That one's set in the 1800s. And at first it kind of just seems like a little travel journey. He's this European painter who goes back to Argentina to make these paintings about nature, and then something really crazy happens to him, and it was really wild reading about that. And then the last book is The Literary Conference, and that one was probably my favorite of these 3. It was so wacky. It is about a main character who is a translator, an author, and also an evil scientist. So let's just say that one is a lot of fun. After finishing up with Aira, I decided to continue on with my Argentinian streak, and I picked up Hopscotch by Julio Cortazar. And this is a book that I've been meaning to read for a long time, but I've kind of been intimidated because this is a very well-known piece of experimental literature from the 60s. And I feel like experimental books never got weirder than they were in the 60s. And I just want to point out just how truly ugly this copy is. That is really a horrible cover design, but I strangely grew fond of this book, even though it's totally water damaged now because I happened to accidentally drop it in the toilet. But it was the clean toilet, but still, it was unfortunate. I had a weird time reading this book, let's just put it that way. So there are 2 ways to go about reading this book. You can either read from chapters 1 to chapters 56, just straightforward, kind of in a linear fashion. But if you'll notice, chapter 56 is only like 2/3 of the way through the book. So there's still like 200 pages that you don't get to if you read it in that linear style. So if you want to read the whole book, then you have to do it Hopscotch style, where you're kind of jumping back and forth throughout the chapters. You start off on chapter 76, and you go back to chapter 1, then you're all over here and there, and you're really all over the place, which was very fun, but it was very disorienting. I found it strange not knowing like how much progress I made in this book. I felt like I was reading this book for days, and I'm like only on chapter 4, and you're just like, how much of this book is going to be left? You never really know, which I think was good. It put you in this really unsure frame of mind. The protagonist of this book is a guy named Horatio, who is kind of a douchebag intellectual living in Paris. So he's got all these like pretentious Parisian artistic friends, and they just get together and they listen to jazz and they talk about the nature of reality throughout the night, and they worship this weird author. So a lot of the fragments from this author's work are in the book. So most of what they had to say was very interesting, very mind-bending, philosophical conversations going on here. Cortazar really makes you think when you're reading this book. But also there's this kind of level of like douchebaggery, not relevant to society, pretentious, people vibe going on. They're really not great with women. Women are okay to be your girlfriend and all that, but they don't really contribute to these intellectual discussions. Cortazar kind of writes about women knowing things intuitively with their emotions, whereas guys are intellectual and they can understand things, but it's, a different way of knowing the world, and that could get a little tiring. And Horatio doesn't really accomplish anything in this book. I mean, he's kind of in this intellectual crisis. So if you don't like books where not a lot is happening, you might not be a fan of this. But that being said, there are some very funny episodes, but there isn't really that much of a point or a plot, especially when you are zipping around back and forth. There are multiple stories going on at once and can be very disorienting. But I have to say that overall I did enjoy it, and I'm glad that I finally took the time to check this out. And I can definitely tell that Cortazar is a brilliant writer, so I will be reading more from him in the future. While I was struggling my way through Hopscotch, I was also reading Kintu by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, and this is a book about multiple generations of a cursed Ugandan family. And this is a very intriguing book, and I made a review video about it if you want to learn more about this book. It is a very underappreciated work of literature. It came out to all this great success in Kenya in 2014 and has just been released out to North America. So if you are interested in checking out some fiction from Uganda, this could be a good place to start, and see my review video if you'd like to hear more. My biggest reading accomplishment of the month was definitely finishing up Don Quixote, which I started back in January, and I've kind of been slowly picking it up, putting it back down again, but I really read most of part 2 in July. I found part 2 to be so engaging, I really couldn't put it down. So all I want to say about this book is that if you think that it's going to be boring, or just reading about a guy who thinks he's a knight roaming around, that it's not going to be interesting, it really is so much fun. And don't be put off by the 1,000 pages. Like, there's so many other stories within stories that are going on here. There's so many different love dramas that are going on. This book is hilarious. And part 2 is, like, so meta. Because, it was written 10 years later, and it exists in this world where this fake Don Quixote copy was put out, and Cervantes is just attacking, basically, the phony Don Quixote. So, Don Quixote and Sancho live in this world where people already know them through part 1 of the book, or they know them through this fake Don Quixote version, so they have to try to prove that they're like the real versions of themselves, and it's so like meta and crazy for such an old book. So I really have to say, so enjoyable, definitely worth checking out. Don't be afraid of this one, it is so much fun, and I was really sad for it to be over, actually. I also got around to reading The Driver's Seat by Muriel Spark. There was one night that I had off this month, and I just spent it out on my balcony reading this book in one sitting. It was easy to do. This book is very short, and it's a good one to read all at once because you can really feel the tension building. You can really get lured into the story. It's about a woman who, as you can see from the cover here, has a very horrid taste in fashion, and she goes on vacation, and shit gets real. And let's just say Muriel Spark is a very wicked woman. The more of her books that I read, the more I'm like, whoa, you're twisted, which I do enjoy. This book does a fascinating job of exploring determinism. As the title suggests, are you in the driver's seat of your own life? Are we ever in control of the things that we do? Can we be in control of others, or is it all predetermined from the start? So very fascinating book, and if you have an hour or two to burn through it, I suggest that you do. My reread of the month was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which was one of my favorite books of all time, but I hadn't read it in a few years, so it was so exciting to get to return to this, screwed up world that Emily Bronte has created. I love this book so much, and I found that I really identified with Nellie, the housemaid who's kind of telling most of the story in this book, because just like me, she is like a fiend for drama. She just loves getting into everything that's going on and all these crazy interpersonal relationships, and I'm just like Nellie too, I'm just eating it up. I just really don't understand people who don't like this book, because to me it's just so much fun, and I love that the characters are awful because it makes for such a great story. There's so much passion and tension and so much great things going on in this book. After finishing this book, I've been slowly making my way through the Masterpiece Theater adaptation, and I have to say that Tom Hardy makes for a flawless Heathcliff. He is really crushing it in that role, which is making me love Heathcliff more than ever, even though you shouldn't, because he is a very bad dude who does a lot of illegal things in this book, but still, I can't help it. I'm a sucker for this book. It is so much fun. And suck it, Jane Eyre. I read 2 short story collections this month. The first one was Get in Trouble by Kelly Link, and I hope that I don't get in trouble with anyone for saying that I thought this collection was just okay. I find it's always kind of bad when a book starts out with like 10 pages of glowing reviews and author blurbs, and it sets that bar so high. Your expectations are like, everyone thinks it's the best thing ever, and then you read it and it's just satisfactory, not really that amazing. The writing didn't blow me away, and you just are kind of disappointed from what you were expecting. So these stories they're just fine. They are kind of fun and quirky, very imaginative. Kelly Link writes about this world that's populated by superheroes and ghost boyfriends. So these were fun for the most part, but I never fully got enraptured in her stories, and none of them were really that memorable where they'll make a lasting impression on me. It really felt like I was just kind of unwinding at the end of the night watching an episode of TV. You know how some books are just so literary and you have to think a lot, but these stories were just kind of like a TV show. It was kind of happening all in front of you. You didn't have to work too hard to figure out what was going on. So they were sort of fun, but I didn't love it. The next short story collection I read was a pure delight, and it was Carry On Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse, who I've never read before, but really enjoyed myself. These are fun, kind of a nostalgic, charming little tales, and you can't read a lot of them in a row because they're very formulaic. Each story is about Bertie Wooster, who has these friends that keep getting into trouble, and then he goes to his butler, Jeeves, who comes up with all these genius ways to get them out of their troubles. And Bertie Wooster is a true chaotic good character. You know, he's willing to do whatever it takes to help his friends out, but he often ends up getting into these crazy situations, like where he's kidnapping a child in order to help out his buddy. So they're very comical tales and fun, clean humor and very witty, and I really enjoyed them, and I will be reading more Jeeves in the future. The last book that I finished this month was John Crow's Devil by Marlon James. And Marlon James is best known for his giant book, A Brief History of 7 Killings, that won the Man Booker Prize a few years ago, and I love that novel. And I've been meaning to get around to Marlon James's back catalog for a while now. And I finally got to check out his debut novel, and this book was rejected for publication about 78 times. So it is a real testament to perseverance, and I'm glad that this book got published, and I'm glad that I read it. It was very wild. I mean, it's strange, it's dark, it's certainly some kind of horror novel, and it's set in this small town in Jamaica, and it's basically about this epic clash between these two holy men. So there is the rum preacher, who is the town's regular preacher. He's a bit of a drunk, and then he gets uprooted and replaced by this apostle York, and it's all about the rum preacher gathering up his strength so that they can have this epic clash, and it's all about the fight between good and evil. And Marlon James is so good about writing about Jamaica. He writes in patois, so the dialect is amazing. This book is very violent and visceral. We're constantly reminded of the bodily functions of these characters. They're always pissing themselves, they're always vomiting, they're fainting, going into trances. It's a very intense experience, and the violent scenes in this book are so over the top. It is like Game of Thrones fans would find a lot to admire about some of these scenes and what goes on. But it's a really captivating book. I found it hard to put down by the end, and I read most of it in just one day because I was really sucked into this world. But it was just such an evil and difficult world to be lured into. It's not fun stuff to be reading about, but I will say this was quite the debut, and I'm excited to read next The Book of Night Women by Marlon James. So those were the books I read this month. I'm currently reading some short stories by Grace Paley, which seem very calm and placid in comparison to some of the over-the-top stuff that I was reading this month. And these are just stories about real people, everyday lives, single moms. I'm enjoying them so far, but I will get back to you when I finish this book. Anyway, that was my month. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you were reading. Bye!